Before we get into the review, and a heads up for people who didn't check out my thoughts on the Ancient Gods Part 1, but I am not in any ways a Doom expert. My first real experience with Doom was in 2016, and with Doom Eternal. The following will be my personal thoughts on the Ancient Gods Part 2, and I played both parts of the DLC and the campaign on I'm Too Young to Die. So if you're looking for a hardcore fan's thoughts on the Ancient Gods Part 2, you won't find it here. With that said though, let's get into it. Doom Eternal, the Ancient Gods Part 2 is obviously the second part and final part of the Doom Eternal DLC plans, but I could be wrong. This time last year we got a fantastic sequel to Doom 2016 in Doom Eternal. Towards the end of 2020, the first story DLC in the Ancient Gods Part 1 was released, and while it was hard as fuck, and even playing it on the easiest difficulty, it was very enjoyable and ended on a pretty sweet cliffhanger. Well, fast forward about 5 months later and the Ancient Gods Part 2 has released. Now if you enjoyed Doom, then the Ancient Gods Part 2 will keep the demon slaying rolling. The DLC will take place immediately where the Ancient Gods Part 1 ended, where the Doom Marine or the Doom Slayer or the Doom Guy, basically whatever you want to call him, he summons the Dark Lord, basically the be-all and end-all, and it is an identical version of you.
Ooh, twins. Which one is the evil one?
Doomguy tries to flat out slay the Dark Lord right then and there, but as the DLC would end pretty quickly, because, we don't want the DLC to end pretty quickly, the Dark Lord leaves and tells you to find him in the central city of Hell and yeets out of there quicker than the PTA disbanding.
The PTA has disbanded!
There are 3 missions to make your way to the Dark Lord, with each level providing a pretty decent variety of scenery and colour palette. You return to a evacuated city, there's snowy mountaintops, and of course the New York City of Hell. Now, I played this on a Xbox Series X, and while the Doom Eternal hasn't received the next-gen upgrade, it's still pretty as fuck. Of course, there's fantastic combat, and I'll get to that in a moment, but there's also some more traversal and platforming here in the Ancient Gods Part 2 in my opinion, and these moments give you a breather between the brutal combat. There's also a new mode of traversal too with the super shotgun. You use the grappling hook attachment to latch on and swing around the map. Now it does take some time to get used to, but thankfully the DLC gives you a little training area so you can get accustomed to the controls and the feeling of this. Speaking of combat, like you'd expect in Doom Eternal, it pulls no punches here. Now for those of you who, like me, barely made it through the Ancient Gods Part 1 without your wrist snapping in half or putting a fist through your monitor, the Ancient Gods Part 2 isn't as hectic or insane as the first entry. Now sure, don't get me wrong, there are some challenging moments here and there, but while I was playing the Ancient Gods Part 1, I had Formula 1 concentration zoned into my brain, and I had to mentally prepare to play that DLC. Part 2 is still challenging and wasn't as mentally or physically taxing, but it still slapped me around if I got cocky or careless. Now I've seen videos of comments saying that this DLC will quote unquote break gaming journalists, and it won't by any means. Now just like the first DLC, we get some new enemy variants that will change up the gameplay a little bit. We got some stone imps, which can only be taken out by using the full auto attachment on the combat shotgun, but you can also take them out by using the chainsaw and getting more ammo. You'll also be able to use the new power weapon to take them out, and I'll get to them a little later. Now besides the standard fireball technique, these imps will actually roll themselves up into a ball and shoot themselves at you across the map, a bit like a stone version of Sonic the Hedgehog. Cursed Prowlers are new, and they're a pain in the fucking ass. Now they'll poison you, which will slowly drain your health, slow your movement speed, and you won't be able to dash. Now the only way to take out a Cursed Prowler is by using a blood punch on them. Now it's a great idea and it changes up your targeting priority during combat, but it's also a bit of a fucking hassle. Multiple times I'd be focusing on larger targets, and for a Cursed Prowler to poison me, it would completely fuck up my rhythm, leaving me more exposed for attacks. But having said that, it does change up the gameplay just a little bit. The Armored Baron is, well, an Armored Baron. Now the only way to take down their armor and expose the Baron underneath is to shoot the glowing gauntlet on their hand when they're about to strike, or by using plasma weapons. The armor will recharge too, so once the armor goes down, focus on taking that fucker out before the armor regenerates. Now you can use just whatever weapon you'd like on these enemies, but you could also waste some rounds trying to shoot the mace when it lights up. Plasma weapons were my go-to weapons anyways, and I found that these enemy variants can really spice things up, especially as they chase you around the map and are impervious to attacks when their armor is up. Now there are also some demonic troopers that are new enemies in the New York City of Hell, really, and they really only die in one hit and they drop ammo. They're a bit of cannon fodder, sort of like the zombies. There's also upgraded shielded soldiers called riot soldiers which have impenetrable shields. You'll need to get around the back of them and shoot them in the back or fire grenades behind them that'll take them out. Now finally, there's the Screecher, which is a bit like the buff totem and a zombie put together. When damaged, these enemies will screech, like their name suggests, but they'll buff nearby enemies like a buff totem. I found the best thing to do is leave these guys alone and use no explosive weapons or large spread weapons, as a single tick will set them off and they'll buff everything and anything around them. Of course, you'll go up against the standard enemy variants from the campaign like the Marauders and Hell Knights, and you'll also go up against the Possessing Ghosts from the Ancient Gods Part 1. Now putting all of these enemy variants in a room together and you're in for a pretty fucking good time. Now the new weapon given to the Doom guy here is basically like a get out of jail free card from when you're surrounded by enemies, and it also makes Marauders easier to deal with. The Sentinel Hammer is another power weapon like the Crucible Sword, where instead of executing enemies, you'll slam it into the ground, stunning enemies and extracting ammo at the same time. Now if enemies are already low on health too, you'll just, take them out, and it's great for stunning enemies around you if you're surrounded. Now if you use the hammer on a flinched Marauder for example, it'll stun them for a longer period, allowing you to swap out weapons and deal some extra and decent damage. To refill the gauge required to use the hammer, you'll need to perform 2 executions or disable enemies like shooting out an Arachnotron's turret for example. Now in 3 out of the 4 levels you'll have what's called Escalation Encounters. You'll need to do these in order to progress, and there are 2 waves. The first wave is required to continue the story and you'll be rewarded with an upgrade to the hammer weapon. It'll be your standard run-of-the-mill defeat all enemies encounter that pretty much plays out like playing the core campaign. Easy enough, but it'll throw in some newer enemy variants. Then there's the second wave, which is completely optional, but it will reward the player with a new skin for the Doomslayer. The second wave in the Escalation Encounters are bat-shit insane, and it's just like playing the Ancient Gods Part 1. You'll go from moderately challenging to over-the-top dashing around the map and keeping mental notes of where you are and where pickups are. Now while the Ancient Gods Part 2 ties together Doom, Doom Eternal, and of course Part 1, it fumbles and drops the ball pretty hard in my opinion on the last stage. The boss fight against the Dark Lord. Now if you want to know nothing further about the DLC in regards to the ending and the boss fight and you don't want anything spoiled for you, that's fair enough, go to the timestamp listed here. Okay, here we go. So the last stage of the DLC is against the Dark Lord, and it's basically a glorified Marauder fight that overstays its welcome and it just gets flat out fucking frustrating. You'll need to shoot the Dark Lord when he flashes green, just like in a Marauder fight, and then use the hammer to stun him. Then, just like you'd expect, while he's stunned, shoot the living shit out of him. After he snaps out of it, the Dark Lord will block attacks with a power shield, and if you get too close to him, he'll swing a power sword at you, and being too far away, he'll use a shoulder cannon on you. If you get hit at all from the Dark Lord, it'll drop health pickups for him. Now you need to empty his health bar 5 times to take out the Dark Lord, and each time you do it the Dark Lord's fight will slightly change. He'll start off like a Marauder and then he'll summon dogs like a Marauder, then he'll summon ghostly Hell Knights and Cyber Demons and Barons of Hell and more. To instantly take out these projected demons you can use the hammer and it will immediately remove them, but you'll need the hammer to stun the Dark Lord so you can deal damage to him. When you get down to his last health bar, he'll barely attack you with the green flash required to stun him, and he'll constantly summon demons at you. On top of that, if the Dark Lord strikes you, he regens health, and it's not a small amount of health too. It's an unoriginal boss fight for what is essentially the king or god of hell, and what makes him even feel more of a pushover is that he's in a mech suit. It could have been really great going up against a copy of you, having their own weapons, killing allied troopers will regen their health, hell even using a demonic BFG that will deal some serious damage to you. But nope, it's a giant mech suit Marauder fight. With the last boss fight spoilers over, if you've seen the trailers or promos for this DLC, you can clearly see that there's a bit of a 2-faction war vibe going on, and there were moments in the cinematics that reminded me of Endgame, but nothing really happens there. It'd be great if there were some moments in this DLC fighting alongside allied soldiers against demons, but nope, there's even moments where demons are fighting each other during a siege, and it felt kinda fucking weird. The Ancient Gods Part 2 continues on the high note that Part 1 left off with, and by the time you get to the final boss and the credits roll, it sorta just feels flat. Doom was going up and up on a pedestal only to fumble right at the end to just leave me with a confused look on my face and a disappointing ending. Now if you're a Doom fan or you enjoyed the previous entries and you're new to the series like I am, the combat and gameplay here will 100% keep you entertained without a doubt. The new enemy variants included in Part 1 and Part 2 with the core demons will change up each encounter. The Sentinel Hammer isn't an instant win button and it looks pretty cool, but the last boss fight and conclusion fills you with a sense of dissatisfaction.